Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Church Coffee, Christianity, Conservatism, and Culture. Today, we're joined by Rabbi David. He is the Rabbi of Tikvat Israel Messianic Synagogue in Richmond, Virginia. Rabbi David, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, how do you take your coffee as you take a sip of it?
Yes, I was prepared for this question because I listened to a couple of your other podcasts, and I would say it's not so much how I take it, is how I enjoy it, which is, with friends or, just with the Lord, doing my work. I consider every coffee shop in Richmond where I live a potential office of mine. So that's how I take it. It's with whom I take it. And then the actual how I take it, it just varies, I was at a men's breakfast recently with our the men from our synagogue, and they were all giving me a hard time because I put a little bit of maple syrup into my coffee, and they all assumed that that's how I always take it. So let me use this podcast to set the record straight and let everyone know that sometimes I do that and sometimes I don't. So there you go.
No worries. Outside of the necessity of caffeine, every now and then I will add some of my kids' Hershey syrup to make a very poor man's mocha. Just because I need a little sugar pick me up. I mean, right?
I think we all do, yeah. Even though you're already sweet. So there you go.
How do you define Messianic Judaism, and how might your definition differ from other Jews and other Christians' definitions of Messianic Judaism?
Thankfully, there is a defining Messianic Judaism statement from the UMJC, the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, which is, we are a part of that. We're also part of Tikkun. We're part of two umbrella organizations. But the UMJC has a statement that all the best theologians worked on, and then it was ratified by the Galactic Senate at a conference. So, and it basically says that it's a movement for Yeshua within Jewish faith and practice, and it can include non-Jews with a confirmed call to come alongside us, and it comes alongside the body of Messiah, the Gentile wing. And it tries to integrate as much as possible, respectfully, within the Jewish world. So that's how we define it in our umbrella organization.
You said non-Jews can come into it if they're confirmed call. What does the confirmed call mean?
Well, what is your vocation?
I'm a civil engineer for the state.
Did you read that in the Bible? Did it say that Rob had to be a civil engineer in your scripture reading?
No, it did not. In fact, I'm pretty sure the Germanic name Robert is never mentioned in Old or New Testaments, nor rabbinic writings, nor probably early church fathers' writings.
And then, let alone civil engineer. So, you had to discern that as perhaps a vocation or a calling in your working with the Lord in your prayer time and in your studies. And so that's what it is. We're not saying that every, that Joe Christian has to do what we're doing, but there are non-Jews with a confirmed call, just like any other calling, to be a part of our movement.
What's your story? Give us a little biography, but also mostly I think our listeners would be interested in how you both came to believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah, as well as pastoring a Messianic synagogue.
How much time do you have? I grew up as a Reformed Jew in Richmond here. I had a bar mitzvah and everything, and I had a strong sense of Jewish identity. And
a Reformed Jew that's a denomination, for lack of a better word, that is right. Kind of on the liberal end.
Yeah, it's slightly more liberal in its expression, and not as observant as Orthodox Judaism or even conservative Judaism. But we did. I went to Sunday school, to Hebrew school, and we talked about the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, and there's a lot of culture and Jewish identity, and I definitely knew that I was Jewish. And then I went away to college, and I just had a strong sense of God's calling. There's the word again. To
Did you grow up in the Richmond area?
yeah, yeah.
And where did you go to
I went
college?
I went away to college in Wesleyan University in Connecticut, which is it's a very secular university, but that's, the Lord didn't care about that. He
I
he
would
pursued me
assume by the
there.
name that it was planted by the Methodists, though.
Yes, it was originally planted by John Wesley, but it is not that anymore. It's very much the opposite of that. But I have very fond memories, and that's where the Lord pursued me, and yeah, it's a great school. I just had a sense of calling, and it was mostly through Christians, through Jesus followers that were able to speak into my life in a way that I felt like God was real, that He loved me, and honestly, that I couldn't get away from it. I felt like hemmed in a sense, because I would, get on a bus or a train or whatever, and there would be somebody there who knew what to speak into my heart, and I was like, I kind of did that thing that Jerry Seinfeld does. I was like, really? You're not gonna leave me alone? Okay. And so eventually, I had to say that I was compelled to believe that Yeshua, Jesus, was the Messiah. And I remember I read Romans very early on, and not that I fully understood it, but in that, Paul seems to be saying that if a Jewish person receives Yeshua, he's regrafted in as a natural branch. In other words, it's the Gentiles that are weird. Like, it makes sense for us. In other words, there's nothing more Jewish you can do than follow Yeshua. And so I read that, and I was like, well, most of Christianity and most of Judaism says that I can't do this. But Paul says that I can, and that it's natural, and he's in the Bible. I'm going to go with Paul. So that's kind of how I thought about it. And I've been going that way ever since. And I fellowshipped in churches when I was in college, and then I taught in Mississippi for a few years. But when I was on break, winter break or summer break, I would return to Richmond, and I would visit and attend this synagogue where I'm sitting now, Messianic Synagogue. And the first time I went, I was like, oh, they built a congregation for me because it was everything that I had grown up with, along with everything that I believed. And it was designed for Messianic Jews. And so it just made a lot of sense. So I would continue visiting when I was on break. And then when I moved back home to Richmond, about 17 years ago, I just, became a member, and now this is where I serve.
And now, a word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Robin Hurst of Fora Travel. Robin is a former winemaker here in Charlottesville and would like to take the stress out of planning and customize your next planned adventure. Robin is a top-notch, detail-oriented planner. Having personally traveled to 25 countries and 33 states, she believes in building balanced itineraries that blend luxury and relaxation with adventure and exploration. She wants to hear what you're looking for and offers customer care that is easy and special. Robin does not charge a booking fee for hotels, cruises, nor tours. She has a tiered pay scale that she works with clients depending on what they need. For more information about Robin, please see the details in our show notes. And now, back to the show. So how were you kind of brought up in the ranks as a maybe a deacon or elder, and then people recognized your gifts in a pastoral level, or did you go off to seminary somewhere? How did you go from member to now leader?
A little of both, but I didn't go away to seminary. I did it because our movement is so small. Almost all of the seminaries, Messianic Jewish seminaries, are online. So I went to Messianic Jewish Theological Institute, MJTI, and I did that online. Our first rabbi, Jamie Cowan, encouraged me to start taking classes there. I started with Hebrew, and I took classes for 13 years. I did it online. They should have given me a bar mitzvah at the end of it, but they didn't. So I'm okay. But yeah, I just kept plugging away. I did one at a time, and while I was doing that, I was getting on-the-job training. Exactly as you said, I was a deacon, a shamish. I was a student rabbi at first, and I just kept going. And I was mentored closely by Rabbi David Rudolph when he was the second rabbi that I worked with, and here in Richmond. And then he encouraged me to do visits with him when I was in the summer. I was teaching, so in the summer I had more time, so I'd go and pray with people and do visits for people that were sick and stuff. And he encouraged me to preach once a month, and then he would red ink all of my sermons. I would submit them to him, and I learned a lot. So I got some practical experience while I was taking classes, and I just sort of moved up slowly.
Give us a little history of your synagogue, when it was first conceptualized or particularized, different buildings, what's changed through the decades. I know we have short time frame, but give us the too long didn't read version.
You want the 5-cent tour? Well, I wish your listeners could see it. I showed you a little bit. It's actually a historic synagogue where we meet.
Well, I will link the website, and maybe if there's some pictures there, you guys.
Wonderful.
You guys
Yeah.
So anyone interested in seeing some pictures of the synagogue, I'll link the synagogue's website down in the show notes.
Awesome. tikvatisrael.com. So it's actually a historic synagogue, which is extremely rare in our movement. I think there's one other Messianic synagogue that meets in a historic synagogue in the world. So most of them meet in their own building, or they might meet in a church or wherever they can meet. But the Lord gave us a historic synagogue building. It started off, it was built over 100 years ago in, I think, 1915. It was a Baptist church. And then they met here, and then they moved. And then an Orthodox synagogue moved in and created a lot of the stained glass. There's Stars of David, in our stained glass, and the small sanctuary and the bima and all those things. And it's so that it's authentically Jewish space, which is really cool. If a Jewish person comes to visit, they recognize it as a synagogue, which is, it's an important thing. And then they abandoned it after a few years, and then they moved. Well, they moved their congregation, so the building was empty, and then it was empty for a few years. And then in 1990, our synagogue moved in and eventually purchased the building, and so it has this beautiful heritage in Christian faith and in Jewish faith. And it looks and feels like a synagogue, as I said, which is really great. And we have to steward it, right? Because it's an old building, and there's some challenges with that. But we're very thankful that the Lord gave it to us. And there's downstairs. There's a place for oneg, which is our lunch, and we can do that. And it's just there's a balcony where in Orthodox Judaism, that's where the women used to sit. And so, but we don't make them do that anymore. And I like to sit with my wife. But yeah, so it's a cool building, and that's a little bit of the history.
What do services look like? I guess asked in another way, what branch of Judaism do they most resemble? What are some Christian tweaks, additions? Do you guys meet on Friday nights, Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, that type of stuff?
So we meet on Saturday morning, which as you know is Shabbat, and if you were to come, you would see that we have Hebrew liturgy, which looks a lot like the liturgy of the synagogue down the street. But within that, we incorporate New Testament insertions, and we have a lot of music, both during the liturgy and just after the liturgy. Which is similar to musical worship set in a church, but the songs would have Hebrew and would sound more Jewish and that sort of thing. We do occasionally sing songs from the wider body of Messiah and just change the Jesus to Yeshua, and we write our own songs as well. And then, so we have worship both in liturgy and music. Then we read from the Torah. And the Torah reading that we do is the same as the synagogue down the street. We're on the same page with them, literally and figuratively. It's called the Torah portion, or the Parsha. So it's like a lectionary in Christian terms. And this reading was decided by the rabbis hundreds of years ago. So if you go around the world, across the world on the same Saturday, that's what they'll be reading. They'll be reading the same, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, they'll be reading the same text. And then we read from the prophets, from the rest of the Hebrew Bible, which is also decided by the rabbis, called the Haftarah reading. And then we have a New Covenant reading that goes through one of the Gospels in a year. And basically the readings go through from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and there are some exceptions for special holidays, like on Passover you would have a different reading, or a special Shabbat you'd have a different reading. And the same goes with the New Covenant readings. We basically go through one of the Gospels, except if it's a special day. And then we have a sermon, and I usually give that, but occasionally we have other leaders give it, or a guest speaker from the wider Messianic Jewish world, or the Christian church here in Richmond. I try to connect with the body of Messiah a lot. So yeah.
Is there communion, Eucharist? If so, how is that done, and what's the liturgy for that, frequency, presentation, etc.?
We take the Lord's table, Shulchan HaAdon, once a month, the first Saturday of the month. And there's Jewish liturgy that we use. We try to make it as Jewish as possible in its original context. It was the Last Supper was a Passover meal, so we acknowledge that. And we acknowledge that it's a renewed covenant. That's how we see it. It's not as though God in Yeshua was doing a completely, totally new thing and scrapping all the old things that he did, because that would make God to be schizophrenic, and that's not the God that we worship. The God that we worship is faithful and consistent. And so we see the renewed covenant, the new covenant, as a continuation of God's promises to Israel, and then by extension to all nations through Yeshua. We do that. We do a reading from John 6, and we do a reading from 1 Corinthians that describes that perhaps many churches do, and we do some Hebrew blessings. And if we have visitors that have not yet clung to Yeshua, I just encourage them, try to, in a winsome way, encourage them to observe. And then I encourage parents to discern whether their children have made that decision as well. And we do that.
What gospel are you guys in right now for your new covenant reading?
We're reading through the Gospel of John this year, and it rotates between 3 of the 4 Gospels.
And what do you read it in Greek or maybe a Hebrew translation, or do you read it in English? Like, if so, like, just what translation or what version?
So the Hebrew Bible obviously is originally in Hebrew. So when we read the Torah portion, we read it in Hebrew and English, and then when we read the New Covenant, sometimes we read a translation, a Hebrew translation. There's a few. There's a Franz Delitzsch version, but we usually read that in English. And it's usually there's a couple Messianic Jewish versions of the Bible, of particularly the New Testament that I like, that are prevalent in our movement. One is the Complete Jewish Bible, translated by David Stern, and the other is the Tree of Life version. And so we would use one of those, which basically shows the Jewishness of the New Testament, which is, the main point. If you read, like, for example, the word Judaios is typically translated as Jew in half of all English Bibles, right? So when you read the New Testament, particularly John, it says the Jews were trying to kill Jesus, which if you think about it, makes no sense, because they were all Jews, right? He was a Jew, all his followers were Jews. Yes. When people say that Jews rejected Jesus or something like that, it just makes no sense in the same way, because basically everyone around him was Jewish, except for there's like 5 Gentiles in the entire New Testament. There's the Samaritan woman, you can count them on one hand. So those are the kind of things that we try to draw out the Jewishness of the New Testament, and so there's certain translations that help us do that.
And are there baptisms? If so, what's the theology you hold to?
Absolutely. So, so we do immersions. We do them on Rosh Hashanah for those that are deciding to follow Yeshua, and we go to the James River. I think it was the Jacob River before it was changed by King James. That's a little theology joke. Anyway, so but yeah, we do immersions, and it's the same as communion. we try to show that this is a Jewish thing. And I say to Jewish people that are a little bit hesitant about it, I say, hey, look, we were doing this first. If you look at the mikvah, if you look at the immersions, right? John the Baptist, John the Immerser, was doing it. He wasn't just doing it willy-nilly, right? He got this from somewhere. He got it from the priesthood, he got it from the mikvah, and he got it from Ezekiel. And Ezekiel said, I will sprinkle clean water on you, right? And I will give you a new heart. So he was doing an immersion for the repentance of sins, but he wasn't doing it in a vacuum. He was doing it because he was immersed in the Jewish scriptures. So we share some of those with folks so they understand what it is. And, it's really awesome. And I've immersed Jews and Gentiles, and it's always a beautiful thing and a meaningful thing. And it's not just, I don't think it's just an outward expression of an inward thing. I think it is that. But scriptures seem to say there is something that happens in that we die with him and we are raised with him.
Can you explain why Rosh Hashanah first? Maybe give like 2-sentence explanation of what that Jewish festival is, and also why that day over Easter, Christmas, or Pentecost, some other holiday.
It's the new year, and it's a day for renewal, and we do a picnic and we do other things. We cast our breadcrumbs into the river as well, as a symbolic idea of the Lord, separating our sins from us and casting them into the sea. And this is done in a non-Messianic synagogue as well, this tashlich. And so a lot of the themes of Rosh Hashanah, of the Jewish New Year, go along with renewal and rebirth. And so it's a natural fit.
Are there any Jewish holidays that you don't observe? And if so, what's the theological reason for not observing them?
We observe all the Jewish holidays. There's certain ones laid out in Leviticus 23, like Shabbat and like Passover. We do those. And then we do ones that were developed a little bit after the writing of the scripture. So Purim, I'm getting ready for Purim right now. I'm writing a Purim spiel. Basically, I'm taking the story of Esther and making it into a Western. So it's Western, right? We put the Esther in Western. I don't know. I'm trying to think about it. Anyway, there's a pun there, I know. So we celebrate Purim, the festival of Esther, which is described in the scriptures, of course, in the book of Esther, but the how to do it and all of that was developed after. And Hanukkah obviously happened between the two testaments. It's acknowledged, at least in the book of John 10, that Yeshua was walking in Solomon's colonnade during the festival of, some translations say dedication, but it means Hanukkah, right? So yeah, sometimes if you're reading the scriptures, there are hidden Jewish things in there if you don't understand that background, which is why another reason why we want to use a translation that shows the Jewishness. But yeah, so we do all of the Jewish holidays, and then there's other more minor ones that we're working on. There's like one for trees and different things. So, but all the major ones we do.
And kind of the other side of the coin, what Christian holidays do you observe, and are there any differences in that liturgy from what a Catholic or Protestant might see?
There are no Christian holidays that we officially observe.
Not Easter or Christmas. No, interesting.
Christmas, they recognize the birth of Yeshua, hopefully, if it's not too commercialized. And there's other stuff going on there, but hopefully they're recognizing the birth of Yeshua and the beauty and the miracle of that. And so we try to do that within the Jewish festivals. One good time to do that is Rosh Hashanah. Creation was supposed to traditionally happen on Rosh Hashanah. So some people believe that Yeshua was born on that day. And also the festival of Sukkot, which is tabernacles or booths, where we understand that God is with us. That's a good time to recognize that Yeshua was born, because in the prologue of John it says that that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then a few verses later, and the Word tabernacled among us. And the Greek word is skeneo, which is the word for sukkah. So the Lord sukkahd with us. He tabernacled with us. So it may be implying that the Lord was born on Sukkot, or And in a larger sense, we can definitely say that it's saying that the Lord is with us in a real way. And we recognize that during Sukkot because God took care of us in the wilderness and he dwelt with us in the Sukkah.
And famously during Jesus's transfiguration, I forget which apostle, but one of the three asked if we should build a temple or tabernacle or tent, right? It's just like he's so overwhelmed of the presence of God that he's like, we need to build the building, right?
We need to build a sukkah. That's right. And it runs throughout the scriptures. There's the Sukkot David, the sukkah of David, the tent of David, the tabernacle that the Lord is rebuilding in these days to include the nations. So there's that imagery is all throughout. So we recognize the death and resurrection of Yeshua, just like the Christian world does in Easter. We recognize that, of course, during Passover, because that's what he was doing. He was connecting his story with the Passover story. And we also recognize it during Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, because the Lord brings atonement to us. And so those are the times when we remember those things that are remembered within the church. And then, around the Saturday around December 25th, sometimes I'll give a, nice quick mention to the idea that Yeshua followers around the world are remembering the birth of Yeshua. And in our personal family, we have some traditions like that. And many of our members may, in some ways, recognize Christian holidays in other ways, but in the official congregational life, we don't do it.
I've gotten the sense over this conversation that most of your congregation would be Jewish by ethnicity or just religion background in general. Is that the case, or do you have some quote unquote Gentiles mixed in there as well?
It's not the case. When you're building something like a congregation, in a congregation like this, it's going to be more attractive to non-Jews than it is to Jews. And that's been true since the modern Messianic Jewish movement started in the 70s, and it was primarily Jewish at that point. And in the 80s, there was a shift. There are a lot of folks that are coming here that are interested in the Jewish roots of their faith and interested in the festivals, and they want that perspective. And a lot of them have that, as I said, confirmed call to join us. And I think it's a beautiful thing. There are Messianic Jewish congregations where they are majority Jewish, but what you have to do is you have to kind of be a gatekeeper in that sense. And if someone from the Christian world comes, you have to be like, thank you so much for joining us, and here's a church down the street. And I just don't find that very pastoral. So I assume that if someone comes to our door, that I am supposed to, shepherd them and help them and be their rabbi, unless things change or something like that, and they decide they want to be they're called somewhere else. There are congregations that are majority Jewish, but they're rare actually, and we do want to try to make our congregation palatable and accessible to Jewish people, to show that Yeshua is Jewish and that it is a Jewish thing to do, as I said. But we have to be also pastoral and welcoming to those that feel like they're called to be here.
What's your relationship with other synagogues in the Richmond area? And on the other side of that, what's the relationship with other churches, really, of any denomination in the Richmond area?
In the definition of our movement that I gave, we're supposed to be connected to both. I think for other rabbis, it's hard, because what I'm doing is either offensive or could be dangerous, to them. So I just try to be as respectful as possible, try to be a part of the Jewish community where I'm as much as I'm able, and connect with other rabbis and rabbinic leaders in a respectful way. I've connected at the JCC here and there. In the past, I was in some plays there, and just try to integrate and be respectful A lot of times rabbis are going to be more gatekeepers. But I had a pretty good relationship with a rabbi here in Richmond, and he invited me a few years ago to get coffee with him, and we had a good chat. And I got to share a little bit of my story, some things that were on my heart. Try to be a blessing.
What about churches? What's any relationship with any other pastors or congregations in the wider Richmond area?
Yeah. Let me say one more thing about the first thing. So, scriptures say they will know you're my followers by your love, right? So the more that we are authentic and that we are not trying to proselytize or convince anybody of anything, but that we have an authentic faith and that we are Jewish and for Yeshua, and that we have, the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, empowering us to love and to do good where God has planted us. I think that the more that we focus on that, I think the more that we can have an impact on the Jewish community in a winsome way, in a way that's not offensive. Now with the Christian community, it's slightly different. I feel like those are my people in a sense. I mean, the Jewish people are my people, but the Christian community is also my people. I've found a lot of strength and a lot of help and a lot of hope in connecting with the church of the city. I do it as much as I can. I'm also trying to connect to the Jewish community as much as I can, but the connection with the body of Messiah, at least, up to this point, has been more fruitful and more has gained more traction. I think the connection to the Jewish community perhaps will come in the future. That's my hope. But I've been able to connect with the church, and in my early years of the ministry, I did so with a little bit of pride, because I was like, oh, we got the Jewish stuff, we got, I understand that Yeshua is Jewish and Paul was Jewish, and I got a lot going on. And I realized over time that, the historic church has a lot to offer us. And we have a lot to learn from them in terms of missions, in terms of understanding the Holy Spirit, in terms of Christology and theology and things like that. And then as I've humbled myself, I've been able to share with local Christian groups about the Jewishness of Yeshua, and I've been invited to speak here and there. We have a really great relationship with a local community here in Richmond. It's called MAPS Global. It's a church, but it's also a missions base, and it's a worship and prayer center, and it's a school. And we did a Shavuot service with them, where they do prayer every day from 8 to 8. So we went over there and we did a traditional Jewish prayer service in the morning. We did it 3 times. And then I played on their worship team, played keyboard, and then they let me share a little bit for about 10 minutes on Pentecost, on Shavuot, and the Jewish origins of that, and how it connects to Acts chapter 2. And it was a great symbiotic type of event, and so I love things like that. There's a local men's ministry called Ignite that I have spoken at here and there, and I have pastors and ministry leaders prayer here once a month. I've done that for about 7 years, and it's in this very room that I'm sitting in. Sometimes it's just a couple folks, sometimes it's more, but I anytime I meet a pastor, I invite them, or a ministry leader, I invite them to come pray.
You've already kind of mentioned or alluded to you're not directly proselytizing to Jews. If you are, you're doing it in kind of a winsome, more understated way. And I ask this because I know proselytizing for Judaism is not super a thing, but we are called, and we are called to be missions to the world, and both by Jesus, and certainly Paul was a Jewish missionary to the Gentiles. What does evangelism in your congregation, for your congregation, by you look like in both a theological term, but also in a practical sense?
Well, there's the heart, and then there's the outward practice, right? And there's the mind, right? in my heart and my mind are focused on the fact that I have a conviction about Yeshua, and that informs everything that I am, everything that I do. And it's not just something that I believe, and that it in my own little world, and therefore it is true. I believe it is a truth that is, what's the word? An empirical truth, or something more foundational about Yeshua. Furthermore, he's our guy. He came to us. And as I said before, not all of us rejected him. If all the Jews rejected him, then you would never have heard about him, because he only went to the Jews. But some of us did, and but all the early followers of Jesus were all Jews, and somehow, somewhere along the way, it sort of got away from us, just for a brief 1700-year period. But we're back, baby. All right. And I think the Messianic Jewish movement is a sign. It's a sign. And a sign is not unto itself. A sign is not for itself. A sign points to the one that is faithful, right? If you saw a sign that said Grand Canyon this way, you wouldn't be like, oh, we're here, this is great, and rejoice and take pictures with the sign. No, you would keep going to the Grand Canyon. That's what you came for. So the Messianic Jewish movement points to the faithfulness of God and God's faithfulness to the Jewish people. And we are assigned to the church, and we are assigned to the Jewish people of that. And a sign is not for itself. A sign cannot be, a Bible thumping over the top. We're right and you're wrong. And it just doesn't work that way. But we can have conviction about what we believe to be true. And so the way that we share the good news is evolving, and it's based on that. But we try to be authentic, and we try to be loving, and we try to be hospitable, and we try to be filled with the Ruach and allow him to draw his people, because the Lord longs for his people to know. But for me to say that Jesus is the Messiah, hey guys, I think some of us missed it. That very statement is offensive. A prophetic movement, a movement that is in the minority, but is seeking to proclaim the truth, is going to be offensive. Ezekiel was not a popular guy. Isaiah was not a popular guy. These are not popular figures. But as a Messianic Jew, I can relate to the marginal Jew, the marginal Messiah, who was not always popular, was not always accepted wherever he went. And even some places he went, there was a lot of familiarity. It says he couldn't even do a lot of miracles there. This was the Son of God. So, Kal v'chomer, how much more should we expect to not always be accepted and not always be effective, right, in our sharing? But that's not the point. The point is to be faithful, to point to the one who is faithful.
Before I ask this, I already mentioned this in the notes, but this question is being asked not in a political way, but in a theological way. How does Messianic Judaism view Israel? Because there's branches of Christianity that are kind of like, yeah, whatever. There's branches of Christianity that think, sign of the end times, that state of Israel's back. And obviously for both political and ethnic reasons, the state of Israel has been formed for a variety of reasons, and there are political problems today, but just, or maybe not, depending on how you look at it. But how does Messianic Judaism view the current nation state of Israel? In a theological sense, like, yeah, well, do you have 2,000 years? Let's try that out.
No, it's a good question. Well, first of all, you asked, what does Messianic Judaism think? And, I can't speak for everyone, and there's the old joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So it's definitely not going to work. But I think the main thing is to understand that in theology, there are tensions. There are 2 things that we hold to be true that are in tension with one another. And that's true when we say that God is our Father and our King. right? On the one hand, we're his kids. On the other hand, we're his servants. On the one hand, we have to do what he says. On the other hand, he's going to love us no matter what. And they're both true. And they're in tension with one another, but they're both true. Avinu Malkeinu. And the same is true for the identity of Yeshua, fully God and fully human, and other such things. And so, there are tensions within theology, and there's a tension to the land. The land of Israel, does it belong to the Jewish people? Well, you could look at it two different ways. There's a tension to it. And you're wearing a shirt, right?
Mine.
It's your shirt, right? But could I also say that it's God's shirt?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so you could.
I'm blessed by God to be able to have a good shirt
right.
on my back.
So you're stewarding it, right? What if you were to write something offensive or mean on the shirt and walk around with it? What do you think might happen?
I'd get anywhere from weird looks to maybe getting pushed in the gutter, depending on what was written.
Right. And maybe the Lord would take it away, right? If you weren't using it correctly, right? That could happen. And so the same is true for the land. The Lord did give it to us, but to steward so that it's a blessing. The land is supposed to mediate blessing, the same as the people are supposed to mediate blessing. We're supposed to be a light to the nations. And if we are not doing that, there is a consequence. I'm not sure that I know if that will be applied or when it will be applied, but the consequence in the past was what? Exile. If you're not going to represent me, if you're going to push the face of the poor into the dirt, if you're going to worship other gods, and you're going to insist on doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years, then you don't get to be in the land. But there's a tension to it because our calling is still to be the same. He said, when you're in the land that you're exiled to, the city, pray for its welfare, for its good is wrapped up in your good. So we still have the same calling because God is faithful, right? And eventually he does bring us back into the land. So that's the tension there. And, sometimes I think about it like King David. Does King David have a right to exist? Yes. Is he the one God chose to be the ruler? Is he anointed? Yes. Is every decision that King David made correct? Of course not. So sometimes to the nation state of Israel, we have to be Samuels and encourage, and sometimes we have to be Nathans and call them out. And any political nation state is going to be flawed, like a person, like King David. But I think that the nation state of Israel is a sign, just like we're a sign, the Messianic Jewish movement. And a sign, again, is not for itself. A sign, it points to the one that is faithful. And so hopefully we can encourage the nation state of Israel and the people of Israel to align themselves with God's kingdom and God's purposes for the land, because there is a purpose for the land. And the New Testament does talk about the land, even though it's not always obvious. In Yeshua's most famous sermon, the Sermon from the Mount, Torah from the Mount, he says, blessed are the meek, for the meek shall inherit the earth. And he's quoting a psalm. But the word for earth in Hebrew is haaretz. So you could translate that, the meek shall inherit the land. So it does talk about the land and the land promises in the New Testament, as it should. And I think that you can't really separate that from the gospel, because the gospel writers didn't. But neither can you say, like, oh, I stand with Israel no matter what, whatever they do is great because those are God's chosen. Like, that's not it either, because King David wasn't perfect. And so you can't say whatever King David says, I agree with. Well, you agree with having somebody murdered and stealing their wife? No, of course not. So I think we have to be careful and thoughtful about how we speak about Israel and how we support Israel.
This wasn't on our notes while we were talking about this, but do you have a favorite New Covenant book? I know that maybe not, but there's one that really kind of speaks to you. Perhaps Romans, since that kind of seemed like an intro, but thought that might be a good good question to end the conversation on.
Wow, that's a really good question. I have, I will say that I often say one of my favorite books is Leviticus, which is not in the New Covenant, but it's just because people often skip over it. But there's a lot in there. I am very fond of Romans. I am very fond of it. I think it's very helpful, and I'm fond of Ephesians, and I'm fond of the Gospel of John, and I think that they're all very Jewish in their own way, and what I'm especially excited about is the Jewishness of those books, because they're often read outside of their context. Ephesians, Romans, and John are often read as anti-Jewish, and Paul is very pro-Torah. Just read Acts 15 and Acts 21. There was even a rumor.
See how much he cites just the Psalms over and over and over and over again.
Right. But when I say pro-Torah, I mean that he was positive toward the law. And, that...
I think in Roman, I'm pretty sure the law shines a light on sin, right?
Yes.
And he's quoting that.
Yeah.
There.
And he says, do we uphold the law? Absolutely we do. The law is good. It's us. We have a heart problem. But he's very Torah positive, and in Acts 15 and Acts 21, you see that where there's a rumor about him that he's teaching that Jews no longer have to keep the Torah, so that they will know there's no truth to this rumor. Go take this vow. No truth. And so, but this rumor about Paul, that was written 2,000 years ago. It's the same rumor today. We're not under the law. We're under grace. Well, what does that mean? We think in Messianic Judaism, it means we're not under legalism. There's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female. Okay. Well, anybody that's married will tell you, there's a difference between me and my spouse, right? There's a functional difference. There's a difference in calling. There's a difference in emotions. There's a difference in how we define words, right? I would say this is clean. My wife would say it's not clean. So we have to come to an agreement about that. But in terms of how we're loved and how God saves us, and he saves us by trusting in Yeshua, those are the same. We're both equally valued, is what we think Paul means. But functionally and calling, there's still a difference. Because the foundation of Messianic Jewish theology is distinction, mutual blessing, and interdependence. So if the two things aren't different, then they can't work together, right? There's an echadness, there's a oneness to it. But a oneness doesn't imply uniformity, it implies unity. It was evening and morning, it was one day, Yom Echad. And the man and his wife were one flesh, Basar Echad. So that oneness is a oneness of unity. And we even say that of the Lord. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The Lord is a oneness of distinct parts, as well as a marriage and as well as the first day of creation. I forget what I was saying. You put a quarter in me. I just kept going, but
no, that's great.
Yeah,
it sounds like Romans might be hold at least a special place in your heart for the New Covenant. But
yeah, so what I love about the New Covenant is showing the Jewishness of it, and that could be any book, but particularly in those books. But showing how this is a Jewish text. There was a Jewish guy in the 1800s who he found the book of John in Hebrew. He was a little boy, and he read it, and he was like, "Oh, this is just like the mystic text that I'm reading in my yeshiva, in my Jewish school." And he took it home to his father, and his father threw it in the fire. And he'd never seen his father burn a Jewish text before, and he was very confused about it. And then later he came to faith in Yeshua, and he remembered the words of John that he read that fit with everything that he was learning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word, that memra, all of those ideas are within Jewish faith and practice.
Rabbi David, thank you so much for coming on Church Coffee, and we'll see everyone next week.
Yeah, I have a question for you though.
Shoot.
How do you take your coffee?
Oh, thank you. Normally straight black. I don't mess around with sugar or cream.
Okay.
But again, if it's 3:00 on a Saturday and I've had a day with the kids, I'm like, I'm gonna just dump a glob of chocolate in there and maybe some sugar too. But I don't like the cream. I don't like cream. I like a little bit of sugar if I need to pick me up, but generally straight black. There's a really good premium coffee roaster here, Shenandoah Joe's, that the owner flies directly all over the world to source beans straight from the grower. So I almost think adulterating your coffee is kind of puts that effort to moot. So I try to honor the work that's put into sourcing those beans so ethically and so directly that I should be drinking it straight black.
Oh, wow.
If
Now I'm feeling guilty.
if it's a regular coffee, I'll still drink it black, but maybe I might.
Yeah.
But help it
So the short answer is, how do you drink your coffee? It's ethically, right?
That's good. That's good.
Is there something I can be praying for your listening audience? You think that
I think I'm not sure. Probably just for everyone to make it to church on time and to maybe reach out to you if they're having a problem, or reach out to their own pastor. Pastors are here. Often, I think pastors are often seen as kind of the CEO, and some people are even kind of like scared about confronting a pastor. But I think if you have any problems, I'm sure reach out to Rabbi David, who will be linked below, or please reach out to your own pastor that if you're having any problems from sexual sin or relationship problems or any of that, your pastors want to hear about that and know you and pray for you.
Can I, do you think I could pray a blessing?
Sure, please do.
So this is the blessing given to Aaron in Numbers. Yivarecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha, Yarden panav elecha vechunecha, Yisad Adonai panav elecha, ve'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his face upon you and bring you peace through Yeshua the Messiah, the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Amen. A better place to end it. Thank you so much, Rabbi David.
Thank you, brother.
Our album art was done by my wife, and our theme music was composed by TJ Stokes.